Hello, and I'm Dr. Melissa Lopez-Larson.
And I'm Laura Larson.
And today we're joined by a special guest, Kim Henshaw, who's located in the Gib Harbor area in Washington State. And I asked her to join us today and give us some tips on how we can help our kids learn a little bit more efficiently at home and kind of work through some of the homework assignments that we've been given to kind of get their education on track while we're kind of doing some homeschooling ourselves. I asked Kim to join us and give us her tips because she has a very interesting experience and she has come to homeschooling kind of in a similar circumstances to what we've all been forced to kind of homeschool as well. So welcome, Kim. And I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, yeah, welcome from ground zero in the U.S. I had previous careers, multiple careers, but my last thing was as a program manager. And I got laid off in the last downturn and then had my baby and just kind of never went back to work. Our homeschool journey started about 4 years ago. And what happened is our older daughter had something called PANS, and I'm not going to go into the whole sordid story, but she had a brain inflammation that was caused by a pathogen that she caught. And what it did to her is it actually, when she was inflamed, she would go through these flares, which is typical of the illness. When she was inflamed, then her brain would shut off, and everything, it seemed like everything that she had learned was gone. She was an early reader, but then stopped being able to read. She was early at math, stopped being able to do it. And so, but it wasn't all the time, it wasn't consistent. So she was in this little private school, and they couldn't, I mean, with only 12 students in a class, they couldn't handle the irregularity and the volatility of what would happen to her. It affected her behavior rather a lot also. And they would expect her to be on, and she would be on for several days, and then she would start to get sick again, go into a flare, and then she could do nothing. And then she was so frustrated, and so young, being you know, right between 5 and 6, and she really didn't know how to handle her frustration. So ultimately, what we did is we brought her home for homeschooling. We took, and you know, just looking at the public school system with how her disease cycle goes like this, we knew that there's not a teacher with 25 students and there's no IEP that's going to cover this. They just couldn't do it. And we just decided that we're not even going to try that. So we spent, when she was 6, we moved to a rural area where we are now. And we started homeschooling very gently. We targeted her for actual education, formal things, when she was on. But the minute she went off, we just stop, and we do nothing but read stories and then try to get the help she needs. It's very hard to diagnose, so I spend an awful lot of time online and calling doctors and counselors and things like that to try to get her diagnosed and healed.
Was it a shock?
There was a ton of, what's that?
Was it a shock to start homeschooling? I mean, it kind of came out of nowhere a little bit. You're probably like, now what do I do? Right?
Yeah, well, yeah. That was not in my plan.
Right.
I was going back to work, but no.
And that's very similar to the situation we've all been put in, you know, with all of our kids now being home and having to homeschool.
Right. And the possibility of having to deal with the illness at some point in your own household.
Right.
And, you know, how disruptive is this likely to be? Yeah, it was pretty disruptive. I will say that it was a bit of a circus around here for a while, and I had to kind of hit the ground running and figure out what to do and how to do it under an extreme amount of stress, because I never knew when things were going to go sideways either.
Right. Right.
So,
and I think that's kind of where we're all coming from, right? It kind of came out of nowhere.
Yep.
We're all waiting for, pardon my French, the shit to hit the fan potentially.
Yeah, basically.
We don't know when it's going to happen, and we don't know how our families are going to be affected. And then we're tasked to make sure our kids are learning certain things. And so I thought you'd be a perfect person to ask this. And like, how did you manage it? What are some of your tips to kind of that you could pass along to parents that you feel would be the most helpful for them to know, like right now?
Well, and that's the thing, is if I can help somebody make it through this this heightened anxiety phase, then yeah, I want to do that. One of the things that I do want to say about homeschooling is that I didn't plan on it. It wasn't something that I think I thought I was capable of it, but I didn't think that I would actually stick with it. But we love it. It's amazing. And I anticipate that some of you out there homeschooling your kids now are actually going to find that maybe it works better for your child, or maybe you have a kid that is like socially in public school and having a hard time with that, but if you can bring them home, you do what you're going to do, but if you find that this is a good fit, the only thing I'd say is check ahead of time with the rules of your state to make sure that you are qualified. Washington State requires like 45 credit hours of college. Otherwise, you have to take a qualification class. But those are things that your state homeschooling board should have available for you to find out.
That's good to know.
Yeah, that is good to know. Yeah. So share us with one of your top tips.
Well,
there's probably several.
My first one is, unless you are actually a trained teacher, don't try to act like a trained teacher. I mean, their training is, you're welcome.
Good.
Their training is to, like at an elementary level especially, know a little bit of everything, be able to impart that to 25 to 28 kids.
Right.
You have your 2 to 5, okay, then maybe for some people more, but your kids home. And it is a whole different dynamic. You do not have to be that person. Now, if you are a trained teacher who is now stuck at home trying to teach your own children, I think that you should have a glass of wine and a box of bonbons and go sit on your back porch and enjoy that. Because dang,
advice.
It's your turn. Take a break. So that's one of the things, is just don't. You're not. Yeah. But we have all had that teacher, or we watched that movie about the teacher that we wished that we had, who was so strong and so comforting and so engaging. And the experience that you have as that kid with that teacher, it is not because the teacher knows anymore or has any greater experience. It's actually really because the teacher engaged with you as a child. And I'll tell you what, you are a teacher. As a parent, you are a teacher. As a parent, you taught that child a foreign language, and that's why your kids speak English today.
That's right.
So the engaging and having a dialogue is really, really the important part.
Yeah. So you're right. When we all are kind of teachers, we teach our kids things all the time. So how can we teach our kids in a maybe a different way that's not like, we're just going through packets and teaching people how to do kids, or because I can tell you the kids learn math so much differently now than they did like when I learned math. And I'm like, I don't understand this. I don't know if I have time to understand this, nor do I really want to, but
we need to figure it out.
We need to figure it out.
Well, yeah. Okay. So fundamentally with things like math, they do need to understand how to do it. They need fundamental skills so that they can manipulate numbers.
Right.
But from a practical sense of how you live your life, take a look at yourself. How do you use math? You use it when you cook. You use it when you balance your checkbook. I use it when, like the other day, I designed a new chicken pen and I needed to know geometry. So in the using of it is huge. And doing projects that involve your children and pull them into practical math at their level, for one thing, it sticks better. It will stay with them. And for another thing, it gives them a relational space for that skill. And that counts for everything. I need to take a minute here and check my notes. When you engage with them, and since they were born, you've done this, right? Sometimes you steered them along in the path that you wanted them to go. You taught them what you wanted them to know. Sometimes they told you what they wanted to know, what they needed to know. And kids have a pretty innate sense of what it is they need to know in the moment. And, for instance, when your child wanted to learn to walk, by golly, she was going to learn to walk. And you helped, you followed, you observed, you held her hands, you put her little hands on that table so she could stay that way, you watched and you engaged. And then perhaps eventually you expand and you're teaching that kid who can walk and run now you're teaching her how to ride a bike, and that's expansion. So I engage and expand on every practical piece of life, and your kids get such an incredible education that way. If you follow the child, it is much easier to engage a kid who's already onto something. It's much harder to redirect a child into doing math or chemistry or physics or writing if they just don't feel like it. That's an argument that, quite honestly, in this moment, you do not need to have.
Right.
So,
but you can entice them. You can leave out like a little chemistry.
Yes. So a lot of what I do is I leave interesting things laying around. And you can't shop much right now unless you order in, but there's a ton of stuff and there's a ton of discounts right now. Go get them. So I've done everything from leave out a book about apples, and there's hundreds of different varieties, and we learned things that we didn't know about apples, and that falls into it gets your natural sciences in there. You can count the different varieties of apples. You can project. Apples are interesting because they actually self-mutate, for lack of a better word, but they create their own new varieties of apples, which is not something I knew until I read the apple book. And so you could use statistical projection with a high schooler who's taking statistics to say, in 30 years, how many varieties of apples are there likely to be? So, with the littles, a great thing is baking and cooking. You can pull a cake recipe, for example, and have them do the measurements. Now you've covered math. When they read the recipe, they're actually learned formatting for a recipe. Right. They also, if you use something like The Joy of Cooking, there's really a lot of story work and paragraph work. If you read the history of cakes, it has all that in there. So they learn formatting for that. You're reading to them, which activates the same centers as when they read. You can even incorporate history and social studies, because almost every food out there has a country of origin and a tradition of origin. So you just covered an entire day of school, and all you did was bake a cake.
Yeah. So
it's more of a holistic and conceptual way of educating your kids than an isolationist way. We do in schools tend to separate out our topics and say, now you're learning math, now you're learning science, now you're learning this, now you're learning that. And we don't connect them very well in the school setting. The teachers are all specialists. I remember being dinged on a physics quiz once for misspelling a word. And I'm like, that's not your job. Well, the teacher's like, well, you misspelled syzygy, so yeah, it is. Yeah. Okay. Fine. But that's how we tend. What's that? Yeah.
Same argument with professors before.
Yeah, right. And so but teaching in a holistic way, and everything has lessons like this. Everything can be done like this. You may not cover all of them like you can with baking a cake, right. But using a conceptual framework has really, really, really worked well for us, and following them. When my kid says she's interested in one thing, it is amazing. We were talking about the 4th of July and the history of the 4th of July in the United States. And we ended up talking, it led to the Statue of Liberty, which led us to France, which led us to Marie Antoinette. And this was like over the course of an hour and a half, Googling and having conversations. And my daughter remembers these things in a way that I know I covered all this in History of Western Civilization, but I don't remember it because it wasn't contextual.
That brings, because I mean, we typically remember things when they're in a context of a story, when we do put all the pieces together. But when we learn in different fragmented states, it's mostly memorization, and it's harder for our brains to pull out the pieces. But when you remember the whole story together, it's so much easier. And I think we also
Yes.
times, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So the keywords just to remember this concept for me have been engage and expand. So that you look at everything in the context of what else is there behind this? Where did it come from?
Yeah.
And have those conversations.
And really, it sounds like just in a moment, right? Paying attention to what's going on in the moment and taking advantage of an opportunity, of a learning opportunity.
Yes. Yes. On the flip side of that too, especially if you have, for instance, high school kids who are like learning chemistry and it's not something you remember or that you use every day, switch roles, because one of the best ways to remember something is to teach somebody else about it. Take some time and humility and be a student of your child.
Great.
That is great.
So there's a lot that my daughter, she's so interested in Greek and Roman mythology right now. And she is reading all the books. And she comes to me and she tells me about all this mythology that I'll say it, I wasn't interested. But I am now because she is. And dang it, she knows something I don't know, and she knows it well.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let me ask you, how about you mentioned, kind of teaching to the moment, but how much time should we be spending? And I know that kind of varies, and we all have this perception that we should be, teaching our kids from like 9 to 3, and that we're all these different things. I mean, I think I fell into this, stereotype where this is what we're supposed to be doing, and I'm not exactly sure how that's going to happen when we're all working and doing other things.
Yeah, well, no, it's not. It won't.
Okay, so about not doing it.
Well, yeah. How do you go about not doing it, and how do you go about not feeling bad because you didn't do it the way that you thought you ought to? Okay, so you should not expect a child of any age to spend 6 to 8 hours straight, minus lunch, staring at a book or screens. It's not what's happening at school.
Yeah.
Okay, so keep this in mind. So in Washington State, we have a requirement of an annual average of 1,027 teaching hours. What that means is those are the hours that your child should be spent formally learning. You know what that breaks down to? If you take summer out of the equation, that gives you 300 teaching days. That's 3.5 hours a day.
Wow. Okay.
So their days, if you think about how you went to school and how they're going to school, their days include transit time, transition between classes, announcements in the morning, breaks, lunch, recess, waiting for the class to calm down, all those things. So ultimately, by the end of their 7 to 8 hours in that school building, their actual teaching hours have been about 3.5 hours. What you can expect a child to do on actual focused learning for elementary is about 2 to 3 hours a day. That is all they're good for. And after that, their brain needs to actually assimilate everything that you've taught them. And you got to give them that time to do it. For middle school, 3 to 4 hours, and for high school, 4 to 5 hours. And a lot of that can be done independent study. This is kind of where you have to be a little bit acquainted with your kid and their learning style, and make sure that the information that you're giving them in that 3.5 hours is in a way that they receive it the best. There's a lot of information online, but general breakdown is you have your kinesthetic learner. That's the person who can't sit still and took apart your clock when they were 5, and that's that one. They got to touch stuff. You have your visual learner, which so easy, plunk a book down in front of them and you're done. And you have your auditory learners, which are, you know, the kind of the storytelling sticks with them, and many combinations. If you're going to use your shortened time to the best ability, then present things to your kids in the way they best understand it. But do not expect, it doesn't have to be constant teaching time, and it shouldn't be. You know, give the kid and yourself time to break, recharge, and let the brains do so much in the background when you're not watching.
Yeah, so it sounds like we as parents need to just kind of slow down and listen, because our stress, you know, is to push harder is, you know, doesn't sound like it's going to be very helpful, when in fact really maybe we should just,
Or unreasonable expectations of ourselves. The shoulds, we should do this, we should be doing that. And right,
Yes,
there really should never, I always tell people take should out of your vocabulary, because I think it's a very unhealthy word, especially.
I agree.
And just do what you can, slow down, and your kids are going to learn naturally if you follow their lead, is kind of what I'm hearing today.
Yes, you are very much hearing that. And then, you know, this time is so odd. You do, for yourself and for your whole family, you want to slow it down and reduce the stress wherever you can. Our stress and this new requirement that you teach and somehow keep up. When you are short of money or toilet paper or hand sanitizer and you have to solve all these problems,
Right.
just stop. Okay, because pressure causes resistance in you. You've seen it. I know you've seen it in yourself. I mean, pressure causes resistance in your children. You've seen that too. It also decreases the ability to learn, because the stress hormones come up and the brain's like, I got to deal with those now. You know, I can't remember anything. You know, so instead of saying, would you just sit down and do your math? Don't make them do the math. Find another way to do the math. Or don't do it today. Or involve, and when you're in this situation, and I know some of you are in a place where you lost your job and you wonder where the money and the food is coming from. Okay, pick your high priorities. Those are your high priorities. But to take the pressure off yourself with the teaching piece, involve your kids in how to solve those problems. Ask them questions, let them think. Surprisingly, sometimes you get some pretty good ideas off of them.
Yeah.
But the thing that they learn there, it may not be book learning in the classic sense. It's not going to be anything they're going to spit out on paper per chance, unless they write an essay about their experience during the COVID-19 issue. Right. But what they learn is resilience, planning, adaptation, support, how to give and accept help. Those are life skills. Right. That they actually depend on all the fundamentals you could ever teach them. And the fundamentals depend on those life skills too. So the effective use of these fundamentals depends on a kid being able to just live life. And my recommendation to, you know, parents who are really having a hard time of it and then expected to teach too or keep their kids up on lessons, you do your best, but the kids will catch up. Everybody else is in the same boat. There will be allowances made. Right. And there will be time for you. So, you know, throttle back a bit. Don't push yourself hard. Don't try to be the perfect teacher. You want to be a good parent and a good provider. And it's an opportunity too. I see this as an opportunity very much for people who maybe have been feeling distance from their kids. You know, the kids go to school, they come home from work. Maybe you have dinner together and then nothing, right? They're off doing homework. Is to actually sit and say, hey, how was school going anyway? Right. What was good? What was not? You know, is there something we can do about it? Mm-hmm. So, you know, that's really high on my list, is just everybody take a breath, and take a breath for yourself.
Yes, I agree. And I think that's probably the most important tip, is that, well, to summarize, you know, you don't have to be the trained teaching professional. You can just teach to moments in time if that's all you have. If you have a little extra time, you can build in a little bit more structure and, you know, get through some of those packets. Find some really fun, creative ways to teach your kids. Actually find out what kind of learner they are. I mean, this is a great opportunity to know and figure that out. And then teach in a way that best meets their needs to maximize efficiency.
Yes.
But otherwise, just kind of enjoy the time we have with our kids and know in your heart that they will catch up and there's not going to be any time lost. We're all in the same boat together.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Yeah. So that was fantastic.
Yeah.
Any last thoughts or words? Any other questions, Laura?
Well, I'm just going to mention my top tool. So I'm like the classic overachiever, but I'm also the person who will sit down and say, you didn't get anything done today at all. Okay, that's not healthy. Let's not do it.
Say that to yourself, right?
Right? Don't do that to yourself. So what I started doing, and you can really go down a rat hole on the internet with this one, is bullet journaling. But I took it to not an unhealthy extreme. Some people do go like way out there, and they have these beautiful bullet journals and they are works of art. I don't do that. Mine is scrappy and looks something like this with numbers. Just a number, do this, do this, do this. Okay. But the thing to do is actually everything that's a teaching moment, everything that's a relaxing moment, mark those down so you know you got them done. And you just make a bulleted list of whatever is rational for you to get done that day based on the commitments you know you have to meet. Okay, so I cook for my family. And so I have on my list every single day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And by golly, I mark them off as I get them done. Because at the end of the day, I cannot tell myself that I did nothing today.
Yeah.
And every one of those little discrete points of things that you do for your family and the people around you, they count. If it takes up time, it counts as a thing that you did.
Absolutely.
And
Appreciate you pointing that out. You know, whether you're homeschooling or stay-at-home parent for, you know, babies who are not requiring an educational platform at the time, that is still very valuable.
And you're doing a lot, even though
you are
a monetary record of it necessarily, but you have to
no, and it's
that you're doing things every day sometimes, and there's
absolutely value in that.
Checking things off reminds you that in fact you've done a lot today.
Yes, and a lot of it, you know, we're a very concrete sort of society. If you produce something,
right,
then you matter.
Right.
And the thing is that you are maintaining healthy kids and a healthy family in this really crazy, unprecedented time. Oh my gosh, that matters.
Oh yes.
But it's not something you can sit on your desk and look at, right?
Right.
So I look at my book because my book tells me everything that I did that matters.
Yep.
Perfect.
I like that a lot.
I do too. Well, thank you so much. This was amazing. And I loved all your tips. I think they're going to be really helpful for a lot of people.
Yeah. Thanks so much for your time, Kim, really.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. I hope it helps some folk out there to just relax and be healthy in their space and take the pressure off, because this is one more thing that you just don't need right now.
Right.
Well, we're already kind of in a pressure cooker, I think, as it is. So no reason to add any more heat to the pot.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.
All right,
Take
thanks,
care.
Kim. See ya.
Okay, you too.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everybody, for joining us for all these great tips from Kim Henshaw, and look forward to hearing any kind of thoughts or concerns you might have. And remember, if you can be of service or be of help to other people, please do. But if you need help, please ask for it. We're all in this together. Thanks.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.